Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to see that there's a lot of people in this session. My name is Nigel Wrangham. I may know some of you. I'm coming to you looking as one does in environments like this, like I'm 12 feet tall. I'm not. I'm coming to you from Eugene, Oregon, and really glad to be talking about some of the basics of what we've learned about tobacco prevention and youth engagement over the past really 40 plus years. This isn't just theoretical, this is really practical, research-based. The evidence is there, the data's there, information about what's worked and what successful tobacco control programs have in common when it comes to engaging young people. I've worked with CADCA as a trainer and curriculum developer and youth leadership consultant for the better part of 15 years, actually, by this point, with many different substances, including tobacco. And this is kind of exciting, this tobacco frontier, because this project, this training, and the content that we're going to be talking about within this training actually comes as a partnership of sorts between CADCA, specifically GEA, the Geographic Health Equity Alliance of CADCA, and the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who has published a lot of this data that we're going to be springboarding on. So we've got a lot of content for you, going to have a lot of space for people to do questions or comments, and I know Andrew is going to be moderating that a little bit. So I'm really looking forward to it. I trust you can all see where we're going. So I want to begin, before we jump into, or at least wade into content, I want to at least give us a little word or maybe a point about polling. We're going to have some polling options in this. I think a lot of folks have probably experienced some polling in some of the other sessions. So a word about the specific kind of limitations of polling in this platform. So I'm going to launch a brief poll for you. Let's just see kind of how that works and what our responses are. So I hope we're ready to do that. Going to launch this one here, and you'll see the point that I am making. Here is the question we're asking agreement for. 4 response options is perfectly adequate for participant polls. Agree? Oops, out of options, somewhat agree, or strongly agree. Just see what comes up. I like to cut the polling off right when we hit a ceiling, and we stay at a certain number for about 10 seconds. Numbers are pouring in. You may notice the responses look somewhat out of order there, because that's a feature of the polls. They don't seem to go in the order that you put them, but that's okay. Let's see what we feel about this. And then the rest of the polls are truly content-based. We've hit a ceiling in the mid-30s here. This is also a good opportunity for me as the presenter and Andrew as well to see how many folks are with us this morning. Last day of the conference, sometimes numbers drop a little bit and pick up. I see it holding steady, my friends, at about 34, 35. Usually when I say that, the slower ones jump to their keyboard and put in. Let's see what we come up with as far as how we feel about the polls. So, interesting. Looks like many of us agree, some out of options, and some of us somewhat agree. Good, because the polls that we have are going to have 4 options to them. We're going to get some ideas about what we think, feel, and have experienced in terms of tobacco prevention in youth. Thanks for doing that one. So let's talk about where we're going today and who has really seeded the ground for this. There is over 4 decades of lessons learned when it comes to how we engage youth meaningfully, how we engage youth authentically, and how we engage youth effectively when it comes to tobacco control and prevention. And many of these tips on how to engage youth effectively, authentically, and genuinely can be translated, can be adapted to some of the other substances that we may be working on. The research, however, I want to be clear about that, has been done on tobacco. And it's been published in this terrific document. You can see the URL there on the slide. I would encourage you to take a snapshot of that if you haven't already got this terrific publication. The Toolkit for youth engagement that the CDC has put together, there's really nothing like it in terms of a holy grail of information, of case studies, of do's and don'ts, of very simple steps to take. And my task has been, Andrew's and mine, to condense a lot of the material in this to present to you in a 60-plus minute time frame. We'll see how we do with that. So it's a lot of lessons learned, and we're going to be kind of touching on what those are. Now we have a poll that's actually a content poll, not a silly Nigel making a response about the polls. I want to find out where you have been, participants, in terms of your participation so far. So let's talk about the workshops you've been at so far and what they've been about. I'd like to know what the tobacco experience in this week has been. Have the workshops that you've been so far been entirely about tobacco control, mostly about issues other than, or mostly about tobacco control? Or is this perhaps your first tobacco-related session this week? This will actually give us more of a chance to know what to highlight and what to back off on as we present. We held it steady at 35 last time, so when it gets to 35, I'm going to see where we are. And we have gleefully surpassed the 35 number on this one. So the workshops you've attended so far at this forum, and I hope it's been a good forum for everyone. It has been for me, very positive. Who would have thought a couple of years ago that we could accomplish so much in these virtual platforms when we have to? You know, necessity certainly has been the mother of invention in this case. All right, I'm holding steady at a certain number. I don't want to take too much of our time with polls, so I want to see just so we can look at where we're at. So look at that. We have a plurality who's gone to ones mostly about tobacco control, but a pretty close second say this is their first tobacco-related session this week. Good. You're getting a good introduction to what works in tobacco prevention and control. And then a few of you have attended sessions and participated in sessions just about tobacco. Obviously, we have some real tobacco control folks in here. And that's great because us youth engagement people look to you tobacco control people for what works. And that's what we're doing today. Thanks for participating in that one. I think we should get into some content. What is this actually about? Why tobacco control? Well, really, doesn't it come down to this? I want you to join me in just a few deep breaths, because we can't just talk about tobacco control. We want to experience why it's so important that we work on this substance. So join me in an in-breath. And out it goes. And another in, and an out. And another in, and then we let that out. Hopefully that got rid of some of the cobwebs in our system and helps reinforce to us, isn't that what this is really about? It's about human beings' basic necessity, basic right to breathe freely in the environments where we grow up as we're children, in the indoor environments, in the places where we recreate. It really is about that. It's not just theoretical. It's literally about breathing. So let's look at, and we're going to be doing this format for the rest of our time together, what successful youth tobacco control projects have in common. What are some of those common threads that tie together what's made a project effective in terms of not only what they've done for tobacco control, but how they've involved youth in that process in authentic, respectful, sustainable ways. So what we're going to see as we move through the content is an ongoing phrase: successful programs have youth, fill in the blank. Successful programs have youth as researchers, as evaluators, as organizers, advocates, informants, educators, you name it. We're going to go through all of those categories. It's all about what are those common threads. I've decided that I want to do the do's rather than the don'ts. What are the things that actually make our programs successful? The hallmark for all of this, the overarching idea for all of this in terms of the commonality of programs is they engage youth in multiple active roles. These aren't just programs that use youth as audiences to educate about tobacco. These aren't just programs that use youth as people that have a behavior that needs to change, and us adults have the data and the knowledge, so we tell them. Youth are active partners in all of this. Something I like to say is, in the successful projects, in the equitable projects, it's not the adults in charge, and it's not the youth in charge either. It's the data in charge. The information, the research, the reality on the ground, that's all of our boss. That's who's in the front seat driving the car. The youth and the adults are both in the back seat collaborating. So it's not youth in charge, it's not adults in charge, it's data in charge. And in order to really follow what the data tells us, we've got to have those youth involved in multiple roles. Let's take a look at what some of those roles are. We're going to first move through 4 categories, then we're going to get some assessment on what you feel and think about those categories, then we're going to go 4 more. And these are all, remember, from that publication, the CDC Toolkit. The proof is in the publication. Youth as researchers we'll look at, youth as educators, and I don't just mean peer-to-peer educators, I mean educators for the wider public. Youth as advocates, pressing for policy change, because when it comes to changing business as usual, when it comes to limiting access, when it comes to changing some of those predatory marketing and promotion tactics, policy is where it's at. All of these 4, including the last one, organizers, all of these 4 categories aren't just about awareness. They're not just about promoting outrage. They're about changing policy. So it's research about what's out there so that policy can be changed. It's educating the public on the dangers of tobacco, on the predatory tactics, so that policy can be changed. It's advocating, not just for awareness, but again, policy, and it's organizing events around policy change. So let's look at each one of those in a little more depth and see what they are, starting with youth as researchers. Now, not every young person, not every older young person loves to do research and has it as their burning desire, but some of us do, and we need those people. They are gold for our projects, and youth, there are plenty of them that are really capable, competent, enthusiastic researchers. So what can they research? Well, successful tobacco control projects have youth conduct, for example, community tobacco assessments. This doesn't just have to be about tobacco. As I said before, it can be about cannabis. We can do assessments about alcohol. We can do assessments about kratom, any of those harmful products that are out there, but tobacco's where the research says it works. So successful projects have youth going out into the community and surveying attitudes about tobacco, surveying practices about tobacco, surveying sales practices, promotion practices, target market practices, but the youth are actually the ones, in this case, going out and doing the assessments themselves. Successful projects have youth research things like pricing policies, availability policies, promotion policies. Here's 2 examples that are from one, the alcohol world, and the other, the tobacco world. The guy there, the broy dude from Eugene and his beanie there, that's a vape shop. As you can see, the different vape juice flavored products behind that person there. Successful projects have youth research. What are the prices? Are the prices discounted, for example, in areas that are targeted more for sales to young people? Are the prices actually discounted for bulk sales? So youth can go in there and look at these pricing and promotion policies. We know the 4 P's of marketing: placement, price, promotion, and policy. So this is one of the great things that youth can do. Actually, it's very effective. Also, in terms of youth as researchers, successful projects have youth do things like research outlet density. How many outlets for tobacco are in one neighborhood versus another? And we usually find, and this is No great news, I'm sure, to folks who are with us this morning. We usually find that there are certain neighborhoods that are more target rich, more density rich in terms of outlets, and these tend to be poorer communities. These tend to be communities of color. These tend to be examples of inequity in our public health system, where these neighborhoods have lots of these outlets selling these dangerous products. Youth make great eyes and ears for this. Someone's asking if we have a teen-friendly planning packet where teen leaders can take it themselves. Look for that publication I said, and Andrew, I'm sure, is going to type in some URLs for that. There's a lot of great step-by-step guides in that. Continuing with researchers, youth can do, they can map outlet density, and they can do that for any substance. We're looking at the state of Vermont. Have any Vermonters here with us today? Wading through your feet of snow, no doubt, as to find your way to your computer terminal this morning. But youth can actually not just do the research, but create the models and create the images so that policymakers can see actually what's going on. Yeah, that's the STARS assessment. You've got it, Tiffany. Absolutely, absolutely. Successful youth projects also have had youth gather data about the current policies. Are they effective? Are they being followed? Are these products only available behind the counter as they're supposed to be? Are there appropriate warning labels around? Are the promotions where young people, children can see them? Are the products available right when someone walks in? Are the prices consistent across different outlets? Youth are great ones to actually go and check all this stuff out. Finishing up with youth as researchers, successful projects have youth assess community support, not just what are the policies and the practices of the outlets or of the industry. What about the attitudes of the wider community? Is the community ready to actually take on policy change when it comes to tobacco? Is the community actually willing to expend, for example, the political and the social capital so that they are actually going to tackle this? Youth make great surveyors and researchers to get that information so your project knows, okay, we can take this on. Or on the other hand, knows we need to seed the ground a little more before we're really ready to expend the resources. Youth are great eyes and ears and reporters for that. So youth as researchers, there's a lot of evidence to show that it works. The thing about that evidence collection, though, is, of course, it was done in the time before COVID. So for some of these, I'm putting in, just for your benefit, take or leave, some special considerations for us just to kind of toss around in our minds and chew on a little bit. Special considerations in the time of COVID. Remember that research in person can be high risk in terms of virus transmission. A lot of the pictures you'll see in the toolkit, a lot of the illustrations, a lot of the guides show youth face to face with retailers and with each other. We know that's not our reality right now. It may be our reality in probably about 3 or 4 years when we're able to take our masks off, but we're not there yet. So research in person's high risk. We want to consider, just like we've adapted in forums like this, to have more virtual screen-to-screen and online opportunities. It can be done. Also, offer opportunities for assessing sales practices online. Since we do things online, so does the industry. Anything that we do that's inventive and creative in terms of prevention, folks, we can count on the industry using tactics like that so that they get their agenda forwarded, which is to make money off of substance killing young people. So we want to be aware that they're doing it. We want to make sure we're keeping pace. So in COVID, it's not exactly as it used to be. And I don't think it's ethical myself to promote all of these best practices from the guide without saying that we're in a different time. We've got to adapt. Anyway, take or leave that as you will. Feel free to disagree. I love it when people disagree. So we have youth as researchers. The second category, youth as educators. Now, there are several different varieties of education. Education is not just youth telling other youth not to use tobacco. Even this one here, when we talk about peer-to-peer education, we're not just talking about youth who have made a commitment not to use tobacco talking to other youth or middle school youth and saying, here's why you shouldn't. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like that's a bad thing to do, but what we're talking about is peer-to-peer educators about policy, peer-to-peer educators about the data, peer-to-peer educators about the research. So youth who are trained in what the data says by each other and by us as adults, going to other youth and saying, hey, did you know this about tobacco policy? Did you know this about promotion inequity? Do you know this about pricing inequity in our communities? That kind of effective peer-to-peer education, really effective, that youth can do with each other. Successful projects have also had youth educate the community on the secondary and the environmental harms of tobacco and any substance. If you look, for example, at this image, we're looking at discarded Juul pods right here and a couple of other things, but it's mostly discarded Juul pods. We know that those things are toxic. We know that the actual Juul cartridge itself has a battery, which is toxic. These are not materials that should just go into landfills. These are in the same category as something like car batteries or motor oil, and yet they're thrown all over. You walk anywhere near, I live near some areas where there's a pretty heavy foot traffic of homeless people and of youth going to and from school. You see Juul pods everywhere, and these things are toxic. Now, environmentalism, environmental justice, that's a real hot button issue, isn't it, for a lot of youth? So we capitalize on that. We work with our State Department of Health programs, for example, to do that kind of work. And it's a good synergy between an issue that many youth care about already, and they can leverage that education for our purposes here. Another thing that youth have been effective in doing, and there's an example from Audubon, Iowa, that's from the publication, is educating decision makers, whether it's in private sector, which is what we'll talk about, or even public policy decision makers, about the specific language, the specific policies around promotion, pricing, advertising, so that there aren't any loopholes that the industry can sneak through and still promote their products in ways that we don't like. Let's take a look at this example. This was in Audubon, Iowa. Do we have anyone from Audubon, Iowa with us today? If so, I should give hosting privileges to you for a moment and you can tell us all about this. In any case, I'll do my best because this is a really great example. This is the ISTEP group, Iowa Students for Tobacco Education and Prevention, a few years ago, 2016, late 2016. They noticed that there were tobacco products being sold at Dollar General, one of the 99-cent dollar stores like Family Dollar or Dollar Tree. They wrote letters to Dollar General locally requesting that there be no tobacco promotion ads within the store. They used research. They backed up what they said into research about what specifically counted as tobacco products, not just cigarettes. See, we're talking about Juuls and vapes and snus and things like that. Because of that process, because those youth used the data, not just their own opinions, not just their own enthusiasm, but in service to the data, they were able to actually get Dollar General to stop its visible tobacco promotion and its ads in all the stores across that state. And what they really had as their key was making sure they understood the specific language. So youth as educators and youth as researchers kind of combined in that example. Something else, and there's a caveat to this that we'll talk about in a minute, but it is still important. Successful projects have youth be educators toward property owners, toward managers of apartment complexes or places where people live on the benefits of having smoke-free rental policies. We know that smoke-free rentals, they stay clean and they stay livable a lot longer. There's a lot less turnover, and people are healthier throughout the building. It says it right here. Obviously, walls don't stop smoke. When anyone smokes, they all smoke. Youth make good educators for these property owners on what can happen if you have a smoke-free rental policy and the health of your tenants and the longevity of your tenants. Successful projects also not just have youth educate each other on policy, but have youth educate each other on leadership skills, on advocacy skills, on organizational skills. We're looking at a group from Nebraska, a statewide group from Nebraska there. And yes, you may recognize the guy in the green shirt with the beach ball, but we'll talk about that later. But this is a group where youth who have done some work in tobacco prevention are educating the other youth on what it means to write a letter to the editor, what it means to study policy, what it means to make sense of a white paper on pricing policies. And so youth educating each other not just on behavior, but on policy and on skills. So in the time of COVID, what are some special, possibly different considerations that we want to look at when it comes to education? Well, we know that all training, and we thought we'd be out of the woods by now, but we're not. All training and most school these days is either hybrid or virtual. Be careful. If we're having youth do lots of education to their peers, screen burnout is a real thing. Eyes glazing over when we spend all these days looking at a screen for our schooling is a real thing. So we want to be mindful of that. It's not quite the same as it was when we could train in person, and we'll be able to a bit later on. We also want to make sure that we're aware that decision makers these days may be preoccupied with other issues, and tobacco control and prevention might not be number one on their radar screen. With a new rescue package coming out of Washington, with a change in political administrations, with the ongoing economic crisis, and of course the unfolding public health crisis with COVID, those things have sometimes nudged some of our issues to the side. We want to be aware of that, and we want to be aware of a way to nudge those issues back to the forefront. And when I said that there was a caveat about the property owners and about the tenants and managers, let's talk about that for a moment. We know that tenant evictions in some cases are imminent. People are running out of rent money. This is not a time when we, as advocates, as tobacco control folks, as preventioneers, or really even as ethical people, want to make it harder for people in rental housing. So we want to be careful that our education that we're asking the youth to do doesn't end up kicking people out of their housing. Because since equity is one of our grounding principles, housing equity is every bit as important as health equity. Gosh, I see Andrew's doing some great moderation in here. Terrific. I love the whole conversation going on. Thank you for doing that. So we've talked about youth as researchers. We've talked about youth as educators. Now let's talk about youth as organizers, youth as putting together projects, putting together events, putting together awareness, policy fairs, things like that. Youth make terrific organizers when they're guided and mentored by adults, because remember, who's in charge? Not the youth, not the adults, the data. You will hear me sounding like a broken vinyl record saying that because I say it a lot because it's important for us to remember. So what are some of the organizational capacities that youth can have in successful programs and projects? Well, successful projects have youth manage, organize, put together things like community cleanup days for substance-related, tobacco-related, in this case, blight. What a great side door that is, isn't it, when you think about it? Having a day of cleaning up and then the youth show the wider community that most of the trash in this park is cigarette butts and jewel pods. What a great launching pad to talk about how we can limit availability of these products. It's another example of taking an issue and linking it to tobacco control through that passion of youth. Successful tobacco control projects have also helped to have youth organize, manage, and put together awareness and advocacy events. Awareness fairs where it's not just promoting outrage, but getting buy-in so people join the project, getting people to sign petitions, getting people to become advocates themselves. Youth, and some of them love to organize things. I've worked with, and I know Andrew has as well, and I'm sure a lot of you out here in the virtual room have worked with youth that just love to put together projects, put together events. Now, again, a caveat. There's caveats for all of these, but there's a special one for this. We want to make sure that events that we are putting together and having youth organize have a policy outcome component, that we're not just doing events for events' sake. Events are fun. Events can be really time consuming. They can take a lot of energy. They can really take us over. Not a problem, as long as we make sure there's a policy outcome at the end of our efforts. Otherwise, we're doing a little bit of treading water, and that can happen. So successful projects have youth manage and organize community awareness and advocacy events with a policy outcome. And youth can do news conferences and awareness events on any topic that matters to them. At the UN, every one of these panelists, including dear Greta there in her pink and blue, are under the age of 18 during this, and they get a global audience. Youth have the ability to have eyes upon them as authentic, genuine speakers about a topic, not professionals doing it for a living, but real people who say, this is impacting me and my peers and my life. So youth, any topic that really appeals to them, they will galvanize around. So our job as tobacco control people, as prevention people, and as smart strategic people is to link those issues that already are burning passions for young people and link them to tobacco control and prevention, which is our issue. It can be done. It's kind of a fun game to find a way, a hook on an issue that they like and bringing it to tobacco control. Continuing with youth as organizers, successful tobacco control projects have often had youth organize protests, public actions. This is kind of a step more intense than an awareness event, more intense than an advocacy event. This is actually youth getting in the streets and saying, we've had enough. We're looking at the state of Hawaii, obviously here. And these protest events, youth love to galvanize around something where they're promoting justice, where they're fighting against and speaking out against inequity and injustice, which of course really is our entire focus of what we do, our grounding principle, if you will. So successful projects have youth organize protests and public actions in support of, you know what I'm going to say here, a specific policy outcome. We don't do these just for the sake of doing activity. We do these because we know it's linking, as I said, to a specific policy. So they can do these protests, these public actions, and I want to just throw something in there for you. They don't all have to be super serious. They can be fun. The issue we're looking at here is alcohol. It's not tobacco, but there's some lessons from the alcohol world too, especially Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There can be fun runs. There can be things where we do exercising and show that people's breathing is what this is all about in the first place. So it's really about framing our issue in a way that's fun, but also policy focused at the end. So we've had youth as researchers, educators, and organizers. Now, there are also some considerations for COVID when we talk about this, because we don't do so many in person in the street things. We do some. This past year has seen some really amazing street protests, but it's a different climate than it was a few years ago. So any activity out in the community carries some higher transmission risk of the virus. We want to be aware of that. Many news conferences, many public awareness events these days are virtual or through the screen. So we want to make sure that we practice and get better at effective screen communication. Sometimes young people who have been trained to be in-person speakers, in-person advocates, public speakers need a little extra training from each other or from us adults on how best to deliver their messages through a format like this. As a CADCA youth trainer, for example, myself, a lot of the work that I've done with some of the youth training team and other teams across the country is translating those skills that these young people have gotten for in-person education and translating them to what are some specific steps we need to take to be effective virtually. And those of you who've done this, I won't go into all the steps because you know them as well as I do. There's some real differences between how you come off in person and how you come off on a screen. We also want to make sure that we're aware that social distancing may change the nature of protest, but it hasn't eliminated it. It hasn't killed it. Protest is still protest. Organizing events is still organizing events. We just have a new world right now. And as I said, if we're lucky, we're going to probably see the end of COVID by about 3 years from now. So things will go back to a different normal at some point. So we've done researchers, educators, and organizers. The last of this first set of 4 that we're going to talk about, that really all roads lead to in this subset, is advocates. Youth as advocates for change, youth as actual policy promoters. What do successful projects have in common here? Well, the data says, the publication says, the research spells out best practices for this. Successful projects have in common that young people have provided testimony to decision makers. The young people and the adults may script the testimony together based on the data, but the youth actually speak it. Now, we want to make sure we don't fall into this trap of using youth as puppets. I've seen this, and I'm sure some of you have too. We're us adults, because we believe we know the language best, we believe that we know how to communicate best and script things. We write the scripts out, we give them to the youth, who then speak them to the public. That's not respectful, and that's not authentic. What we want to make sure is that the youth and the adults are partnering in creating those sound bites, in creating what the testimony is and what its goals are, and then the youth speak it. But those successful projects have shown that youth providing testimony to decision makers is one of the best, most effective things that youth can do as advocates. What else have successful projects shown us in the data? Well, successful projects in youth and tobacco control have youth use broadcast media to promote and to spread and to increase awareness about public health messages. We have a couple in this picture, and it's used by permission from them, a couple of our young trainers who, in fact, are here this week training. I'm not going to say who they are, but if you see 2 of those people and you've been part of the youth track, both of those terrific young leaders have been presenting to international audiences, in fact, all week. They started by doing tobacco control in their own communities, and one of the things that they did that was very successful was using broadcast media, being on talk shows, podcasts, using the broadcast media to get the message out. Youth will listen to other youth. Adults will also, because of that increased credibility, listen to other youth. What else in terms of advocacy? Well, successful projects have youth do direct media advocacy in any number of platforms, whether it's letters to the editor, whether it's podcasts, whether it's vlogs or blogs, whether it's photo voice. Young people, this kind of combines the research element with the advocacy element, going out, finding out what's going on in the community in terms of availability, in terms of promotion, in terms of target marketing, in terms of outlet density, in terms of community support for the issue, and then taking that information and spreading it to the public through broadcast media. Youth are terrific at this. Youth are often better and more nimble at this than adults are. Successful projects have had them do this. In suburban Washington, D.C., just outside the district line, Virginia, Fauquier County, we had the Healthy Y Street youth. They actually trained almost 10,000, 8,500 youth since the beginning of the middle of the decade of the aughts. And these youth all trained to do specific advocacy work for tobacco control and prevention. If you want more on this particular case study, the proof is in the publication. In 2018, the school board, based on what the Y Street youth had done, adopted a county-wide tobacco and e-cigarette free policy. What's great about this is this policy wasn't punish the people using. This wasn't just suspend people from school. This wasn't just change the behavior of the people using the product. This was actually about county-wide, whether it's adults or teachers or anyone, this was about the environment, not just about the users. And that, folks, is the kind of equity we're looking at in terms of the policy outcomes that youth can help us get to. Perfect example right there. Now, in our time of COVID, there's a couple of considerations that we want to just, again, chew on, get some idea of how we feel about them when it comes to advocacy. COVID and politics have kind of eclipsed public health messaging in some areas, or they've at least taken it over. We want to break through that clutter by innovating the messages that we have. We can't do business the way we did 2 years ago in light of COVID. We can't expect that every single best practice that we're looking at, including in advocacy, is going to translate immediately in the time of COVID. Be innovative, but keep the data in charge. We also want to make sure that when we work with law enforcement, because law enforcement support is crucial, it's also highly politicized. There have been some horrendous news reports and some promising ones as well. When we work with law enforcement, we just want to know we're wading into waters where people are going to watch us and pay attention to us. Just be ready for it. We also want to make sure we use the public health framework, agent-host environment, to present our issues. Because the great thing is, no time in our recent history has the public health model been more understood by the general public. I remember trying to teach, for example, agent-host environment a few years ago to young people and not so young people. And people caught on, people understood it, because I think I presented it pretty well, but it was a bit of a new, innovative way for folks to think about looking at substance abuse. But now, with COVID, and everyone talking about environments and spreading and agents and transmissibility, now people get it. Well, if we're smart, we'll jump on the fact that people are talking public health talk, and we'll use that for our purposes. So, some COVID things to think about. Now, we've looked at 4 areas. We've looked at researchers, educators, advocates, and organizers. Of those 4 that we just spent a few minutes talking about, I'd like to get an idea of where you're at in terms of which ones might be best for your so let's take a look. Which of the following fits best? Now, it's either this one or the next one. Let's see if it's... No, it's not that one. Sorry, we're going to do... I'm not going to do that poll. They have the same. Sorry about that. We're actually going to do this poll. Which of the following here is the ones that we just talked about is the best fit for your youth program? Youth as advocates, educators, organizers, or researchers? Just take a moment and see, it's not just the ones that you've done the most successfully, but maybe the ones that you can foresee based on what we're talking about today might work best for your group. I'm hoping we get more than 7 responses. Is the poll not open somehow? Well, let's see what happens. Okay, people are answering. They're just maybe taking a moment to consider. Or 30 people have left the workshop. We'll see. I hope not. Well, we're holding steady there, so I'm going to see what we've got in terms of our responses here. And it's not too many, but pretty even split. That some say youth as advocates. Researchers got the fewest votes, but these are all appropriate ways and proven successful ways, according to the data and the publication, where youth can be used to increase the effectiveness of our programs. Okay, thanks for taking a moment on that one. I'm not sure why not too many people were in that poll. So right on. Now we're going to look at 4 additional areas. We looked already at researchers, advocates, educators, and organizers. Now we're going to look at how youth can be effective and how they have been effective according to the data and the research Oh, someone said they didn't see the poll. Well, that poll perhaps didn't launch as it should have. I'm sorry about that. Let's actually revisit that poll too when we're done with this section so we can get an idea based on all of them. Somehow it's a feature of the platform. I'm trying to be good-natured about it, but just to be honest, my friends, struggled a bit with the polling feature of the platform we're working on. We're doing our best with it. Wish we were in person and could talk, or on Zoom where we could have polls that worked, but we're doing our best. So we'll have another poll after this. And believe me, I will bend over backwards to make it work for you. So we're going to look at youth as informants, youth as evaluators, youth as specialists, specifically in social media, and youth as enforcers. That sounds a little scary. We're talking about youth as really enforcement, not agents of enforcement, but being able to see if laws are being enforced. So let's take a look. First, youth as informants. Youth as informants. This is youth sharing their ideas and their input on materials, on public health messages based on the data. Well, let's take a look at what that means a little more specifically. Okay. Successful projects have used youth as test market subjects for public health messages. Now, very important distinction here, okay? When we talk about youth as a focus group for something like this, we're not talking about just getting a group of young people together and saying, so, what do you think about tobacco? What do you want to do about it? That may be interesting. We may get some ideas about where youth are at from that. Nothing exactly wrong or harmful about it, but it's not effective. What we're talking about here is we've already developed public health messages. We've already developed policy ideas based on the data. And now we take those ideas, we show them to youth, and we say, do they speak to you? So what we're using the youth for is voices and eyes and ears about materials already created. We're not saying, hey, from the beginning, what do you want to do? And the reason is, and this isn't just a feature of youth, this is a feature of people generally. The reason is if you bring a bunch of people together and just say, we want your ideas in a free form right away, you'll get all sorts of ideas based on people's individual impressions, based on people's individual experiences, based on people's moods that day, based on a conversation they had last night. You won't get a science-based response. So we get the science-based response first, create the materials, and test market them using young people. That works. That works. Successful projects in terms of youth as informants have also used youth to help make outreach materials, public health messages more youth accessible. If youth are your target audience, you want to involve youth in catering messages toward that target audience. Right? You don't have youth just make it up from the ground up, because people do go to school for graphic design and people have talent and experience in it, but you use youth as ways to make this material more accessible, more exciting, more relevant to young people. It's a balance of how we do involving young people and involving the professionals, but when that balance is done well, it's a sweet spot and it works really well. Are there any differences in the time of COVID when it comes to youth as informants? And obviously I wouldn't be asking that if I weren't about to show you some differences that I hope that we can consider. It's increasingly crucial to have these youth-friendly materials now because there's a real media clutter. Youth, as I've said, and as we all know, are exposed to so much of a data stream, really a fire hose, right, of data stream through the screen these days. If we, tobacco control and prevention advocates, want to grab the attention of young people and of those who influence young people, our materials have to be better than ever. Just being on the right side and just having facts doesn't cut it. I mean, if we've learned anything, right, through these last few years of political controversy in our country, it's that we don't change people's minds and behavior through facts. We change it through persuasive techniques that involve emotion. We change it through persuasive techniques that involve energy, attraction, repulsion, these kind of things. So we want to make sure that we're being hip with that and that we're not trying to act as if it's 5 years ago or the 2000s. So this is a different world. Also, youth can often design materials and web-based materials better than adults can. If they have more facility with those platforms, use it. And consider tools like Canva and other infographic generating tools to make information more relevant. Check out Canva. You can make some great stuff with it. Andrew, I don't know if you've used it, but it's a great tool to actually get complex data in ways that grab people's attention and persuade them. Do we have youth as informants? What about youth as specialists? And when we talk about youth as specialists, the specific area where we're talking tends to be with communication technology, especially platforms, and especially social media platforms. This isn't to say that none of us who are older youth, maybe, aren't at all well-versed in social media. Some of us are and some of us aren't. But youth, it is the currency of communication, the currency of belonging, the currency of significance, and often the currency of meaning itself for young people. So what young people can be very effective in doing is helping teach adults about how to use social media, how to navigate social media, how to be social media literate. Or I would even take that another step. I offer to you social media fluent. Social media fluent. On the next couple of slides, these were developed by myself and a young trainer, Rebecca, that I've worked with. Andrew knows her. We've done some tobacco control presentations together. We did a little survey, a little mini kind of education piece about the different social media platforms and how they might work. This is an example of the kind of thing that young people, because a young person did make these slides, all I did was polish them up a bit. This is all generated from her and her research about different social media platforms. For example, what are the pros and cons of TikTok? Well, it's popular. It's very popular with younger teens. It still has a shiny new quality to it and exciting. But that popularity, that accessibility, it comes with a price. It comes with a price. In this case, it's not always taken as seriously. It's more easily infected with harmful messages, including conspiracy theory messages. And it's not really associated, TikTok isn't, with health promotion. So we have other social media platforms as well to consider, like Snapchat. We have almost 250 million users worldwide by now. The messages are instant, accessible, but they disappear very quickly. This is really especially good for youth staying in touch with each other. So if you have an event, if you want to get a flash mob going to actually appear when a vote is happening and have people get support, Snapchat is great because it alerts people. It doesn't involve, it alerts. For more of a sense of involvement, Instagram would be better because Instagram displays what has happened. If TikTok alerts and if Snapchat excites, Instagram involves a little more. So Instagram is still growing. It's not quite as youthy as it was. It's not quite as much of a youth-oriented one, although it still has that patina on it somewhat. It can take a while to get a following. Watch out wading into the Instagram waters unless you're really willing to stay involved. Twitter, we have at this point over 55 million users worldwide. They say that if you incite problems on Twitter, you can sometimes be banned. I think there's an example of that, but it's escaping me right now. But Twitter involves alerts and excites. It's kind of got all three. Good for updates on trends, but it's not so great for deep analysis. It's not so great for deep content because of the character limit. And then the last one before we exit our social media little mini lesson here is Facebook. Great, it's the oldest, it's the most established, many users across the world. It can create awareness and it also can go in depth. Facebook can link to more in-depth analysis and articles and summaries. Lots of content can be on a page. The drawback for Facebook is that grandma uses it too. Not quite so hip, right? So we've got youth as informants. We've got youth as specialists, for social media particularly. Let's talk about young people as enforcers, or at least as the eyes and ears to evaluate enforcement effectiveness. How does that work? Well, successful projects have in common that youth have assisted in retail compliance checking. This, sometimes people have called these sting operations. Please don't call them sting operations. That's not really the most user-friendly term for this. They're compliance check operations. This is where youth, with an adult, with permission, with the right infrastructure of safety around them, go into a store and assess how well, yes or no, if they're actually following the law about selling products that are age controlled to minors, including especially tobacco products, but not limited to that. These compliance checks can be done with alcohol, they can be done with kratom, they can be done with cannabis, any product that's age limited and age controlled that we're working on controlling, this can be done with. In terms of the tobacco world, successful projects have had youth assist in these retail compliance checks, and it's been a great success. Youth like to do it. Someone said they hate the word so much. I hope you're talking about sting operations, because no one likes to be stung. No one likes to be the stinger. No one likes to be the stingy, for that matter. We just watched the movie The Sting last night, in fact, from the 70s. But I digress. Let's talk about special considerations when it comes to COVID and enforcement. Now, these are not necessarily just for COVID, the considerations on this slide, but they're equally important. The safety of the youth is our number one priority. Nothing happens, right, unless we can ensure the youth are safe. This does, Jennifer, sound like those Catch a Predator shows. No, I want you to look over there. There's a camera. Why did you show up in this kitchen? Yeah, those shows here, I'd be good at that, I think. So the safety of the youth, though, is number one. All the effectiveness of what we do, all the policy outcomes of what we do, great as long as the youth are safe if they're the on-the-ground agents. Online sales is another consideration. In the time of COVID, more is available online. The online marketers are getting trickier about how and where and for whom they promote these products. We need to keep pace. That's where the young people as specialists can come through. Yeah, the sting. I knew that would generate some talk. That's a great. Well, we'll talk the sting. We'll talk Redford and Newman in a few minutes. And the last of our 8 categories that we're going to talk about, we just did specialists, we did informants, and we did enforcers. I'm glad I can remember all this. Let's talk about youth as evaluators. It's a wonderful sort of yet to fully be explored, I think, in the other substance world area for youth to be involved in. Successful tobacco control projects involving young people have actually had them, the young people, be involved in determining benchmarks for success, having the young people be involved in determining evaluation criteria, having the young people be involved in determining evaluation instruments and selecting the tools that we use for evaluation. Just because these have traditionally been considered more of the adult side of things because youth might find it boring, that's not true. If you find a young person, and they are out there, if you find a young person who really likes evaluation and that's what makes their socks go up and down, keep them. Now, you can't because they grow up. That's the annoying but wonderful thing about young people is they grow up. But keep them as long as you can, because having a youth who really gets excited about evaluation and who really can help you with it is a gold mine for your project. Okay? Successful projects have the youth help determine these benchmarks. And as we look at some of these examples, these aren't always about substance abuse, because really it's about equity. It's about equity in terms of health. It's about equity in terms of housing. It's about equity in terms of adultist busting and a fair seat at the table. It's about equity in terms of race. It's about equity in terms of socioeconomic class. Equity is what it's all about. So youth determining benchmarks for campaigns about equity, they get interested, they love it, and they're very effective at it. Successful projects have also used youth to collect, analyze evaluation data, not just determine the tools for evaluation, not just determine the instruments, not just help determine what is considered success, but once all that data comes in, analyze it, put it in a form that people can understand, and get it out there to the public. Now, let's see if that poll that I did prematurely last time is one that we can launch. This is a poll, and it should list the 4 that we just talked about and see which ones people find most fit their programs. So, everyone, positive image here to see if it'll go. This says, which of these feels like the best fit? Can you all see this? I see responses coming in. I'll take that as a yes. So this is youth as enforcers about laws, evaluators like we just talked about. This is using youth maybe as informants to each other or to the wider community. And youth as specialists, particularly in social media, but not only. There's a lot of areas youth can be specialists. Okay, now we're getting the numbers that we didn't have on the last one. Something has clicked back in, so thanks for your patience. I also see that, crazily, we only have 15 minutes left of this workshop. We're in the 50s here. I'm going to wait a few seconds and see if that 53, 54 number increases at all. And if it does not, that one person heard me and went, whoops, let me answer really quickly. All right, apologies in advance for those of you for whom I'm doing this too quickly, but let's see what we came up with. All right. Informants, look at that. Well, that's interesting, actually. I like to say that generally when I see a poll, but I actually mean it this time. This is interesting that a majority actually find that youth as informants to the public are the most relevant to the programs that they have. So I would say what you're probably doing then is using youth as test marketing groups, target focus groups. A second, and pretty close second, is youth as specialists. And no surprise that the last one is enforcers. They can be good at that, but in today's environment, when you consider safety, when you consider masks, and when you consider social distancing, it's no surprise that that's the last one. Well, thanks for participating in that poll. That was a quite rather interesting one. Yes, indeed, special considerations with COVID here. And one last quick poll, and that's the last one we're going to do, and then we'll talk about problems and solutions for the next 10 minutes. So in COVID, all these activities don't require as much in person, so they could be timely. Some of these activities that we talked about, like being informants, test marketers, can be done pretty well this way, meaning it's a good time to focus on them. Also, consider some of the young people that maybe aren't so extroverted, some of the young people that aren't such facile speakers. They can sometimes be the ones who really want to do evaluation. They want to do data analysis. I've worked with youth groups where there's someone quiet and sits in the back because all the leaders are getting up there and talking, and that's the kid. She's the one that's a real whiz at analyzing data. When we have them, we want to use them. We want to let them shine, let them fly, okay? Finding a young person with this gift, as I keep saying, you're winning the jackpot. Congratulations if you do. Tell us your secret, right? Very quick poll. I know we're doing 2 polls in a row, but I want to just do poll number 4, which is, it's this. How has this year of COVID impacted your coalition's work? I've been going to several workshops during this week, and I actually haven't heard as much as I thought about this. I almost think some people are trying to not talk about it because it's so unpleasant, and I think we need to actually talk about whether or how much or if our programs, our projects, our energy, our inspiration has been affected by COVID. It's really interesting how the responses come up in the order that the platform wishes, because COVID, what's that? You may have that as the first option. I don't know. It was the last one in the list when I made them. So it's COVID, what's that? Impacted, we're adapting, severely limited, or not limited much. I see 43 people are still probably assessing, or maybe they're getting ready. See, if it were in person, people would be leaving, so they're in line for the lunch buffet, but we don't have that issue today. All right, in the interest of time, and again, apologies to anyone I'm cutting off. It sounds gratuitous that I'm saying that, but I do mean that. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna close this one so that we can see kind of what we got for this, because I am quite curious. One person, COVID, what's that? Well, congratulations. I hope life is good on the moon, where you must be living. So it's been impacted, but we're adapting, seems to be the top. Good. And severely limited, yeah, that's quite a lot of us. I'm glad to hear that adapting. That's what we're doing today together. I mean, if you didn't think that maybe you qualified into that answer, you are now, because we're doing this together. What I want to do actually is look at some general best practices, and then briefly, because we only have a few minutes, talk about some problems and solutions. Number one, the thing that informs all of our work, the principle that's guided our work from the beginning, long before I was involved or Andrew was involved with any of this, the principle that grounds all of our work is this. It's what we call health equity. Okay? Justice and health equity. We can't have public health for anyone unless we're able to have it for everyone. So health equity has got to inform everything that we do. If anyone who's in this workshop today was in my all walks of life workshop yesterday, and I know that some of you were, we did those pieces with the unlevel playing field and which powers keep the up and which powers keep the down. We were talking about health equity, and we're talking about it now, and we want to keep talking about it through all of our tobacco control work, because that's what it's about. It's not about change people's behavior because we disapprove of it. It's change business as usual and the way we look at health and equity in our society. We don't live in a society that has very good health equity. We are the vanguards of changing that. Give ourselves a pat on the back and a kick in the butt, and let's go do it. So that's number one. That's number one that informs all of us. Health equity. Yeah, you bet, Aaron. Ernie is it? Yeah. No, it's Emmy. Sorry. So also, we want to make sure that youth safety remains our top priority with the youth themselves. We want to make sure that we're assessing our own agency, our own organization's capacity. How ready are we to involve youth? When we do this training, or a version of this for the wider public, and Andrew and I have done this together, and my young friend Rebecca's trained this as well with me, we do a whole piece on what are the steps to assess the capacities of your organization for how ready you are to really do this work and to do it right. So that's a little pitch. Come back, there's more. This is just the trailer. We want to make sure that we secure wide community support for our efforts, make sure that the community and our agency and our funders and our political backers and the public at large is on board. And if they're not, we want to work on getting them on board. And we've just looked at 8 ways youth can actually help with that, haven't we? We want to make sure that the adults that we have work with youth are screened and they're safe and they're flexible and they're boundary conscious and they're tireless, inspired youth advocates. It's a rare breed. We're out there, but it's a rare breed. Someone who's both can thrive amid chaotic, multitask, multi-priority activities and environments, and also is able to keep that boundary where I'm the adult and they're the youth, and we know that. It's a balancing act. When you find adults, when you are, look in the mirror and know that you are that, use those adults, screen them thoroughly. That's the kind of people you want. Okay? Be clear that what we're doing is providing a menu of options. We don't write the menu, the data writes the menu. The information and the research that's already out there has created the menu. Our job, partnering with the youth, is to look at that menu and decide what we're able to do in our community from it. See, I told you I was going to be a broken record with this, but I am, because it's that important. The data's in charge. We respond to it in partnership with the young people. I don't know if 5 minutes is enough to get to all the creative problems and solutions, but what I do want to do is get to a couple of them. And Andrew, you haven't seen this yet. This is some new stuff, particularly for this group today. Some of the problems that we come up with, see if any of these resonate. Has anyone ever experienced that school personnel can be difficult to access? They can be preoccupied. They can be busy. They can sometimes not care or seem like they don't care. What do we do when that happens? What are we doing? We're trying to work with the schools. We're trying to get youth involved, but we're just not getting answers. Some things to consider. Invest in building relationships with school people before you need them. Partner with private schools, more alternative education environments, maybe charter schools, actually. There's, yes, the toolkit resources. Oh, is that Andrew? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in that toolkit. Use it, use it, use it. When you're trying to get the attention of school personnel, create lesson plans based on the data that link public health or environmentalism or science or history to the issue of tobacco prevention and control, because it all connects. Boy, if I'm a teacher and I see that there's some lesson plans and I can see the data and the research grounding in that, and it helps me teach my students, and it also happens to help the person recruit people for tobacco control, I'm excited. We talked about that. What about when community partners are hard to engage? What about when community partners don't seem like they're quite ready? I connect to a great readiness tool from the California Tobacco. Great, thank you, Andrew. I hope that we can get that to folks because it's very helpful. But when community partners seem difficult to engage, well, there's some good solutions that the toolkit, and this is all from the toolkit. I'd love to say this is Nigel's brilliant brainstorm idea last night. It's not. This is from the toolkit. Right? Show support. Attend the meetings of community organizations before you need them. Right? Show up what you can do before you ask what they can do for you. Consider faith-based programs, alternative programs, street outreach programs, LGBTQ specific programs, cultural specific programs. There's a lot out there besides, right, just schools. Maybe assign a dedicated adult and youth pair to respond and plan an outreach strategy. I want to get to everyone's favorite. It's not this one. I'm going to actually go to difficulty gaining buy-in from parents and other adults. This is one I've heard. That's why I want to make sure this monster, this is our little image for the problem, is a monster. Very scary, very terrifying. Sorry if you can't sleep tonight after having seen this. What happens when you can't get the buy-in from parents and other adults? Oh yeah, but you know, our youth are so busy. Well, there's some pretty good strategies in the toolkit to help with that. Attend and participate in parent-teacher organization or association meetings. Pitch your youth project there, or even better, hope that when you say love this monster, you're talking about the image and not the presenter, but we'll have that conversation later. Make sure that you actually maybe bring a youth with you to pitch the program. If it comes out of the mouth of a youth and you've developed in partnership what they're going to say, more powerful. Emphasize the whole lost potential nature of youth. When you're trying to sort of get adults on board, teachers on board, school administrators on board. Look what tobacco use costs all of us, whether we use it or not ourselves. And lastly, our favorite problem of all, lack of funding. What you all need to do is send Andrew an email asking for money. No, just kidding, just kidding. That's not what we do. When we have lack of funding as our problem, and it comes up, of course it does in our culture of scarcity, some particular strategies come as helpful for that. Partner with established groups, leverage funding. We know this is General Coalition 101, but Coalition bingo card with these ideas. Jennifer, that's a terrific idea. Also, when funding is scarce, when funding is elusive, work with youth to host creative fundraising events and work in our policy goals to those events with data. Maybe when funding is difficult, offer compensation and incentives that aren't money. Offer opportunities for youth to be involved that build their experience, build their resume, build their leadership skills, build their recognition, build their resumes for law school or college. And yep, session ends in 2 minutes. Got it. Yeah, thank you. Please fill out those evaluations. So you know what? I think it's time for me and Andrew to say this. Thank you. It's been, I know, a little bit of Nigel with a fire hose of information. I'm sorry if I've bowled anybody over. I certainly didn't mean to, but wanted to make sure that we got some of that information out there. It's been a delight, actually, presenting this. I love working with GIA and CADCA on this tobacco prevention and control with youth. It's the vanguard. This is really the way things are going. So if you're on board now, boy, it's going to be an exciting time. So please fill out that evaluation. Please go to closing ceremonies. Don't just bail. Thank you, Andrew, for your support. And thank you all for some of these terrific comments that we've been seeing in the chat box the whole time. I know I haven't been able to respond to each one. Perfect, but oh, so someone saw me present twice in a row. Well, terrific. I hope I was engaging and informative and inspiring. So I see it's time to end. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again soon. Give us a call.